Welcome to another edition of Lunch Hour Live. I am Sue O'Connell. We are so thrilled that you're joining us today. We have a very special program that is airing tonight on WGBH and PBS. It is H20, the molecule that program series that's debuting tonight. And joining me to talk about the making of the series and about H20, about water, is John Bredar. He's the Vice President of National Programming for WGBH, and Laurie Donnelly joins us again. She is the Director of Lifestyle Programming for WGBH. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us. We are, of course, broadcasting from our home, so any noise in the background, I know we're just all going to go with it from now on. We'll never, ever have silence again on a broadcast. I think that's great. Thanks for joining us. So, John, talk a little bit about H20, the molecule that made us. As the series so abundantly makes clear, there's water all around us, but what are you looking at in the series?
So, it's precisely because it is all around us that we felt like, okay, we have to tell a new story here, because while it is ubiquitous and it's kind of part of our everyday lives, we tend to kind of it becomes invisible. And at the same time, the best research suggests that within 10 years we're going to have 40% less fresh water than we need to survive. So we wanted to kind of raise public awareness about it, but we wanted to do it in a really cool, visually interesting, let's get excited about the discovery way, not an overwhelmingly grim look at it. And so this 3-part series is the result of that, and and we hope that it really resonates with a lot of people.
Laurie, it's a broad subject matter, right? And it has a number of ways that you could examine how water impacts both history, the future, our daily lives, our aspirational lives. How did you approach what topics you were going to, and we're certainly going to, no pun intended, dive into these in just a second, but how did you sort of frame what topics you wanted to look at?
Yeah, I think we took it, first of all, we wanted to be driven by stories and by scientists who are looking at the subject, but in a very motivational way. So we wanted to kind of engage people with what research is being done, what the latest understanding is, and also people who are motivated to bring about change. And we wanted the overall tone of the series to be a very positive one and not a finger wagging kind of thing. We're not trying to scare people off, as John said. The other thing in terms of just the way we were approaching it, is we wanted to approach it across the 3 hours in a kind of podcast type style, so that the narrator, Kelly, who was from NPR, was kind of asking the questions that we as viewers would ask. So we looked at it from the very fundamental roots of kind of what is water, how was it created, how did it arrive on Earth? We then looked at kind of civilizations, how did man evolve because of water? How did early civilizations, become involved and evolve because of water? And then kind of the crisis, which is the contemporary present day problem that all of us are facing globally. So kind of that was the 3-pronged approach, but I think it's the overarching approach, which is to make it approachable, to make it evocative, to make it beautiful, and to be answering the questions that we think every person has.
As you mentioned, it's a podcast style, meaning the way that the sort of point of view of presenting it. But of course, it is, again, another great PBS production where it is incredibly beautifully shot. And I want to jump to a trailer here just before we get too far in, just to show folks a little taste of what H20, the molecule that made us. It's debuting tonight on PBS and WGBH. Check your local listings. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Probably because I use it every day, I take water for granted. I'm Kelly McEvers, and I'm a radio journalist. And for this story, I have teamed up with filmmakers and scientists to make a podcast-style documentary about what might be the most important substance on our planet: water. And since embarking on this journey, I am now starting to see this molecule everywhere. We call it the water lens. Look through it and you'll see water inside everything that lives. You'll see rivers in the sky. You'll even see water shaping human evolution. You'll see water in the blueprint of civilization. You'll see water connected to changes and even conflicts across the world. And for me, after seeing all this, I think one thing becomes clear. We really can't take water for granted anymore.
That's a clip from H20, The Molecule That Made Us, which is airing tonight on WGBH at 9 p.m. and at your PBS station. And it's a 3-part series taking a look at the water that's all around us, both visible and invisible. Laurie, I want to jump back to you and just ask and remind folks watching us that if they have questions or comments, they can just put them on Facebook or Twitter and they'll get to me and we can ask our guests, John and Laurie. But Laurie, you know, this is the part I love about making things. You're not an expert in water. John, you're not an expert in water. How do you choose the people that you're going to speak to tell the stories that you want to use the narrative to carry through this great, compelling story?
Passion Pictures, who are our production partners, really were the main force behind finding the characters who are featured in the films. But I think what I loved about them, the people that they found, is that they are, again, so approachable. And that not only are they kind of raising the flag that we have a real problem that we're presented with, that we're in kind of crisis mode, but that each one of them was articulate, was relatable, but also that they are really very forward-thinking in trying to find solutions. And, you know, John, maybe it would be good even to talk about somebody like Jill Ferrante, you know, and kind of what she's trying to do. Because these are movers and groovers. These are people who are really trying to change things in a very powerful and major way.
Yeah, Laurie's right about that. I also think it's really important to point out, too, that, you know, before we start shooting at all, we spend, I don't know, 4 or 5 months just digging in and doing all the research about what are the critical stories that need to be told and who are the best people to tell them. So Laurie was just making reference to Jill Ferrante, who is, she's a scientist in South Africa who studies something called resurrection plants. And as Laurie mentioned earlier, you know, our whole objective was to kind of convey useful information through great stories, well told. And Jill is particularly good at it. She studies a particular type of plant that it dries out completely because they grow in incredibly arid climates. It can lose 90% of its cellular water, and it looks like it's dead. If you're, you know, and you see this great sequence in the show where she's out in the field and she says, "Here, look at this," and you go over and you look at this kind of brown, crumpled nothing of a plant, which, you know, just looks completely dead. And she says, "Watch," and she pours water on it. And this plant has evolved over, you know, millennia to kind of come back to life with just the smallest application of water. And she studies these because she's interested in developing genetically modified plants that are drought resistant, because
John,
that's going to be
as great a job as you're doing explaining that. I think we could actually show the great job that she's doing, because it was amazing for me to watch this clip of you know, awesome. The sort of the invisibility of water around us and the magic that can happen with these so-called unique resurrection plants. So let's take a look at a clip from H20, The Molecule That Made Us.
All plants are at 90 to 95% water in the first place. And it's part of their structure, it's part of their metabolism, it's part of absolutely everything that they are.
Vast regions of our world are getting hotter and drier. For humans to adapt, it makes sense to study how nature overcomes the absence of water. So, for 25 years, plant scientist Jill Farrant has championed a rare group of plants that can dry out and still come back to life.
So this is a resurrection moss. It rehydrates extremely quickly. This is going to happen fast. So watch as I pour the water.
Mosses like this were among the first life forms to colonize dry land.
The plants that I work with are commonly called resurrection plants because they appear to resurrect from the dead state. They're not dead at all. They're just so dry that they look dead. But you just have to add water.
Back in her lab in Cape Town, Jill is trying to discover how resurrection plants are able to break the sacred bond with water and still survive. She wants to use this knowledge to help farmers get through droughts.
My dream is to create a crop that tolerates water loss and does not die, and produce food security in the face of drought. Well, if there hasn't been rain and you get a rain, there's a guaranteed comeback of your crop.
Coco, all yours.
Imagine if a crop could resurrect in 24 hours the way the resurrection bush does.
Okay, let's pour some water on.
In its dry state, the bush transformed its insides into a glass-like substance. And now, as it rehydrates, these glassy tissues soften and come back to life.
This strategy is extremely rare. There are only 135 species in the world that can do this. But in a drought-prone world, this strategy is a game changer.
You know, Laurie, maybe 20 years ago, I'd look at that and think, wow, that would be great as a houseplant for me. Right, so that way I don't have to water them and they'd be great. And then, of course, as we learned about the climate crisis that we're in, certainly it becomes much more important. And now as we're in the COVID-19 crisis and we are sadly seeing some of the dire predictions that we've made about what may happen to folks when there's a crisis that are already living in a climate-challenged environment. But this is just a fascinating story about these plants, which both, I think, is somewhat emblematic of the series in that, we need water to live. Water is often invisible, and we have to find ways to do more with less because we're dealing with more droughts and more floods on both ends of the spectrums, right?
And I think that's the thing, and John mentioned at the beginning, people are not getting, because it's invisible, we take water for granted, and it seems so simplistic. You take your shower every day. You don't think about the clothes that you're wearing that required water to make them. You don't think about that tomato that you're eating that took water to grow. So it's just how much water is involved and how much are we using up on a daily basis. And it hasn't hit home for us. So for people in South Africa, they got the message. They knew that, we think about it like I have a bottle of water right here, and I'm thinking, what would you do if you knew this was all the water you had to live on for the day? We in America have never really been confronted with that. We haven't been told on this day, we're going to turn the spigots off and you won't have water anymore. So I think that's kind of the reality that people haven't confronted. And sometimes we don't even make the connection between drought and all of those forest fires that they had in California. That's a drought and climate change related problem. So how do we get ourselves to kind of get that message before we're actually confronted with the idea of having that spigot turned off?
John, I'm going to show a clip in just a minute of the photographer that went out to all around the world to interact and photograph people experiencing floods. And I want to talk to you more about that after the clip. But before that, I want to talk about the beauty of the series and the beauty of Nova Productions. That it's so great that we all have camera phones now, and it's so great that we have such great access and everyone can shoot a movie. But it is such a great and stunning reminder of the care and concern and attention to detail that the photographers, the directors, and the producers put into this. Can you just talk a little bit about not only just obviously the storytelling, but the beautiful storytelling that you're able to do with the series?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. Well, as Laurie mentioned, we're working with an incredible group of filmmakers, Passion Pictures, led by a guy named Dave Allen, and their and our approach is these are films. This is a visual thing. We want to show you this story in pictures, and they're not just kind of pictures that you'd see on the news. These are like kind of epic cinematic moments. And so we feel like, the way to capture the imagination of an audience is by showing really incredible images or sequences that are built of spectacular images. So you really do, you go all over the world in this series. Our teams shot all over the place. They were in California, they were in Africa, they were, in the Far East, they were in Europe. I mean, it just covered every imaginable scenario. Greenland, in these kind of moonscapes. They were in the rainforest in Republic of Congo. And the idea is we want to transport you into this spectacular world that we live in order to kind of convey the power of water and just what an incredible element it is for us.
I want to show this clip, which to me was just so compelling. It's from H2O, the molecule that made us, which is airing tonight on PBS at 9 p.m. here in the Boston market on WGBH. Let's take a look at a clip of photographer Gideon Mendel as he travels the world looking at folks dealing with floods.
We headed to the Carolinas with photographer Gideon Mendel. Gideon has been documenting the increase in flooding around the world.
You can just pause for a second so I can get the reflection of the church. That'd be cool.
I guess I have kind of fascination with this landscape. There's something about a flooded environment which I actually find very visually alluring.
No. He ain't gonna come in the boat. No, that thing on blue road. Blue road, no, he'll chase him.
The heart of the whole project is a series that I call Submerged Portraits. And it's a series of pictures of people affected by flooding, engaging with the camera directly around the world. Would you be open to us talking to you and photographing you, maybe?
I've been 34 years on this beach, and I've never seen like this. Okay. And if they say it's coming another 3 feet, it'll just about reach the roof on my building. I got a lot of tools in there. I thought we was gonna be all right, but it's not.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Joey. Guys, can you come just a little bit forward? Yeah, that's right. It is quite amazing how long people will sit there and stand there in the water and engage with me. 15, 20 minutes, half an hour sometimes. The portraiture and the direct gaze of the camera for me is so important.
For Gideon, the increase in flooding is a global story. In the past 12 years, he has photographed 20 floods in 13 countries.
The water connects all the people I photograph. despite huge differences in culture, class, location, when the water's in your home, they have a shared vulnerability to flooding, to climate change, to global warming.
John, I was just so struck. I mean, it's said so clearly, but the shared humanity, no matter where you are, what your station in life is, what country you're living in, when water comes and takes your home, water comes and takes your home. And his ability to just capture the complicated feelings was both sad to me, but also hopeful, because we really are all in this together and experiencing it the same way.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation, and obviously his photography is so arresting, and it's transporting, and it does everything that you just described. You know, it paints this picture that I think initially is maybe a little bit difficult for people to grasp. Because of climate change, more water is in places than it has been, and less water is in places where it had previously had water. So you've got drought and you've got flood. And Gideon's work tells that story and connects us all, just like you're saying. That's exactly the kind of approach that we wanted to take in the series. You know, we wanted to transport people. We wanted them to see it and experience it. And the photography, as well as the combination of Kelly's, you know, kind of intimate narration, is, we hope, this kind of fantastically powerful combination that will take people to that place.
Laurie, what are the challenges around the world of getting to clean water? You know, that's another thing. I remember the first time I really traveled internationally outside of my comfort zone. I was shocked that I had to boil water to drink it, and everybody there looked at me like, well, of course you do. What do you do in America? And of course, in America, we have our own challenges with getting clean water. We don't have to look much further than Flint, Michigan to see the challenges there. But is there a global awareness that water as a natural resource, and, you know, as we say in the title, that it makes us, what are the challenges to getting clean water?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, you know, the reality is, I think it's becoming front and center for more people around the world as there's less and less access to water. And, you know, as John said in the beginning, 10 years from now, the Economic Forum is projecting that we'll need 40% more water, which we won't have. So I think little by little, the stories like Detroit, the West Coast is really encountering that now, where there's just lack of access to water. So I think, unfortunately, we have to lose that access or feel it nipping at our heels in order to be motivated to change. So I think that's kind of the reality, but I think the reality is becoming more prevalent, more front and center in our lives every single day. I think that's the reality.
I want to ask both of you, since you know, we're all quote unquote homeschooling our kids at home. I'm reminded of my mother, who lived through the Depression, used to have a phrase that she used all the time, which was "good enough," and I never really appreciated it until now. It's something just has to be good enough. But I know that WGBH has been leading the way and has been working for a very long time on making sure there are always resources to parents and students and learners of all ages. But are there any things associated with H20, the molecule that made us, with the series that folks can access to help maybe build some home learning for both themselves and for kids?
Definitely. Yeah, you know, the one of the best things and it's the simplest and it's the most fun. But if you go to the H20, the molecule that made us website, and you can just Google it and make sure you're going to the official site, there's this fantastic little feature called Calculate Your Water Footprint. And you can go on there and you can actually figure out how much water you use on a routine basis. And, you know, for any parent who's, you know, trying to do a little bit of home educating, this is a fantastic tool to kind of open everybody's eyes, including the parents, to what their water use is like. So I highly recommend that on our site.
And Laurie, another opportunity is to just slow down and look at things through the water lens, if you will. You know, we have a great time here. I live in Roxbury in Boston, but Roxbury's called Roxbury for a reason. And every spring, snakes fall out of the walls literally fall out of the walls and onto the sidewalk. And I always love showing the kids in the neighborhood that if we just look for them, they're there. And it's an opportunity to use the lens of water during this slowdown that we're in, if you have the opportunity to do that, to try and create some lessons and some curiosity. Absolutely.
And I think we can do that even beginning with our kids. I just wanted to mention, we have a group at WGBH called our Learning Media Group. They've actually created kind of learning modules, which will now be available to teachers across the country so that it can be used in schools as well. But, one of the things that motivated Kelly to kind of narrate this was really the idea that, she felt she was taking water for granted. And I think for all of us who's worked on the project, I know it's profoundly changed the way I look at water, the water use. I turn on that shower in the morning and it's like, I was just as guilty as anybody of taking the 20-minute shower. But, I have to say I'm not doing that anymore. So it really, changes your consciousness. And I think we can do that starting with just at the youngest age of just, really appreciating water and how it kind of impacts every area of our lives.
Joe, one of the things that I've learned in doing Lunch Hour Live here is a lot of folks watching at home want to know how the program got to be. What was the pitch on this? How did it go? Were you just all sitting around having a meeting and saying, what are some issues that we need to look at? Or is there the big board of, we're interested in climate change, we're interested in what? How does the conversation lead to a program series, H2O, the molecule that made us?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not a simple answer, but is that you're actually not that far off. So we were in conversation with these producing partners we have at Passion Pictures in the UK. And we were seriously talking about what are critical stories that we can tell that are really not getting any attention. And we were driven in part by some research that we'd found through a colleague of ours, Giulio Bocoletti, he's a water scientist who works for the Nature Conservancy, who we've known through some other projects. And he pointed out this finding that he had made years ago that Laurie and I keep referencing, this idea of 10 years from now, we'll have 40% less fresh water than what we're going to need. And we started looking at that and realized, this is one of the more critical problems the entire world is going to face. Why don't we throw in on that subject and see how we could tell a story, a fascinating story about something that's utterly mundane. You totally take it for granted, and try to open people's eyes to it. So it really did start with a need and the feeling like, obviously in public media, we like to take on stories that are super relevant, but we also think super cool.
Well, it's great, and I can't wait to watch it. H2O, the molecule that made us, debuts tonight. You can check your local listings. If you're in the Boston area, it will be on WGBH tonight at 9. Pulse, Civilizations, Crisis, 3 great shows that are coming your way. And again, just both compelling and beautiful to watch. John and Laurie, thanks for joining me. I appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us. And to everybody watching at home, stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask, think about other people. I'm Sue O'Connell. I'll join you again soon on Lunch Hour Live. Thanks for watching.